The possessed confession tapes of Kellerman Prison. The package arrived at the offices of the Ashford County Historical Archive on a Tuesday morning in late October, wrapped in brown paper that had yellowed with age. Inside was a cardboard box containing 7 audio cassette tapes, each labeled in faded ballpoint pen with dates spanning from March to September of 1994. A handwritten note accompanied them and signed stating simply, "These should never have been sealed. The public deserves to know what spoke through Leonard Vance." Margaret Chin, the archive's senior curator, initially dismissed the delivery as another in a long line of donations from families cleaning out basements and attics. The Kellerman State Correctional Facility had closed in 2019, its records scattered across various institutions, and materials from its operational years occasionally surfaced through unofficial channels. But when she played the first tape on the archive's vintage cassette deck, she immediately recognized that something was profoundly wrong. The recording began with standard procedural audio. A corrections officer announcing the date as March 14, 1994. The hiss of magnetic tape. The scrape of a metal chair against concrete. Then the voice of Leonard Vance, convicted in 1991 for the murders of 3 women in rural Pennsylvania, began his confession. "I want to tell you about the first one," Vance said on the tape, his voice flat and affectless. "Her name was Caroline. I remember her name because she told it to me. She said Caroline like it was important, like I should remember it. And I did. I remembered it when I was burying her in the woods behind my property. I remembered it when the police came asking questions. I remembered it in the courtroom when they showed photographs of what I'd done to her face." Margaret pressed pause. She had read about the Vance case in preparation for cataloging the donation. 3 confirmed victims. A handyman who had worked his way across small towns, leaving bodies in shallow graves. He had been sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms and had died in Kellerman in 1998 from complications related to liver failure. A straightforward case of a serial predator finally brought to justice. But as she continued listening, she heard something that made her blood run cold. At the 17-minute mark of the first tape, just as Vance was describing how he had selected his victims, there was a shift in the audio. The background hiss intensified. Then, beneath Vance's monotone recitation, another voice emerged. It was lower, distorted, speaking words that Margaret could not immediately understand. She rewound the tape and listened again, pressing the headphones closer to her ears. "We are the inheritors," the voice said. "We are the ones who remain." She checked the label on the cassette. March 14, 1994. The recording was 30 years old. There was no possible way for new audio to have been added to a sealed magnetic tape. And yet she was hearing something that had not been documented in any of the transcripts she had reviewed. Something that spoke in a voice that belonged to no human being she had ever encountered. Margaret spent the next 3 days reviewing all 7 tapes. She found the intrusive voice on every single one, growing louder and more distinct as the recordings progressed. By the 7th tape, dated September 3, 1994, the voice was not merely layering beneath Vance's words. It was responding to them. Completing his sentences. Laughing at details that Vance himself delivered without emotion. She contacted Dr. Howard Reeves, a forensic audio specialist at the State University, and arranged for him to examine the tapes. His preliminary analysis, delivered via email 2 weeks later, was brief and deeply unsettling. The magnetic degradation patterns on these tapes are consistent with recordings made in the early 1990s, Dr. Reeves wrote. There is no evidence of splicing, overdubbing, or digital manipulation. The secondary voice you identified appears to be embedded in the original recording substrate. I cannot explain how this is possible. The voice was either present during the original session or it appeared on the tape through some mechanism I do not understand and cannot scientifically justify. Margaret began researching Kellerman State Correctional Facility. What she found in the archived records painted a picture far more disturbing than the simple biography of a closed prison. Kellerman had been constructed in 1887 on the site of a former mining settlement called Harrifield. The settlement had been abandoned in 1862 following a series of unexplained deaths that local newspapers of the period attributed to fever of the mind. Miners had reportedly turned on each other in the tunnels, committing acts of violence that were described in contemporary accounts with language usually reserved for descriptions of demonic possession. The prison had operated continuously for 132 years. During that time, it had housed some of the most violent criminals in Pennsylvania's history. But what caught Margaret's attention was a pattern buried in the facility's incident reports. Inmates transferred to Kellerman from other institutions frequently experienced what was documented as acute psychological deterioration within months of their arrival. Suicide rates at Kellerman were nearly 4 times the state average. And there were repeated references in internal memos to something called the Harrifield influence, though the term was never explicitly defined. She found a psychological evaluation of Leonard Vance from June 1994, 3 months into his confession sessions. The evaluation had been conducted by Dr. Patricia Womack, a prison psychiatrist who had worked at Kellerman for 22 years. Subject displays marked changes in affect and presentation since beginning of confession protocol, Dr. Womack wrote. Initially cooperative and emotionally blunted, consistent with antisocial personality disorder. Now exhibits periods of disorientation, claims to hear voices that tell him what to remember, and has developed pronounced religious ideation centered on concepts of inheritance and continuation. When questioned about the source of these beliefs, subject states that something lives in the walls here, and that it has been waiting for someone like me. Recommends suspension of confession sessions pending further evaluation. The confession sessions were not suspended. According to the logs Margaret uncovered, they continued until September 3, 1994, when Leonard Vance was found unresponsive in his cell following what the incident report described as a self-inflicted episode of respiratory obstruction. He had survived, but had not spoken a coherent word for the remaining 4 years of his life. Margaret reached out to Caroline Vance, Leonard's surviving daughter, who was now 63 years old and living in Ohio. Their phone conversation lasted 2 hours. Caroline had not seen her father since his arrest in 1991 and had no interest in defending his memory. But she did have something to share. My father wasn't always what he became, Caroline said. Before Kellerman he was a monster, yes. He killed those women. I've accepted that. But after they put him there, something changed. I visited him once about a year in. He looked at me and he didn't know who I was. Not because of dementia or anything like that. He looked at me like he was wearing my father's face, but there was someone else looking out through his eyes. He told me that Leonard was gone. He said Leonard had been given to the house, and that the house always takes its due. I never went back. Margaret asked Caroline if she knew anything about the confession tapes. The warden called me in 1998 after my father died, Caroline said. He told me there were recordings that had been sealed by court order. He said I didn't want to hear them. He said no one should ever hear them. He was crying when he said it. A prison warden crying on the phone to the daughter of a serial killer. He told me that what happened to my father was happening to others. That it had been happening since the prison opened. That there was something wrong with that place that no one knew how to stop. Margaret hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. Then she went back to the archives listening room and played the 7th tape from beginning to end. Leonard Vance's voice had changed dramatically from the first recording. It was rougher, deeper, and spoke with a cadence that did not match the speech patterns documented in his trial transcripts. But it was the other voice that made Margaret's hands shake as she took notes. I was there when this building was stone and timber, the voice said, emerging clearly between Vance's words. I was there when the miners came down into the dark and found what was waiting. I have worn so many faces. I have spoken through so many mouths. Leonard is mine now. And when Leonard is gone, I will find another. There is always another. The tape ended with Vance screaming. Not in pain but in what sounded horribly like ecstasy. Investigative journalist Nathan Corso learned about the Kellerman tapes through a contact at the Ashford County Historical Archive. Margaret Chin had reached out to several media outlets, hoping to find someone willing to take the story seriously, and Nathan's reputation for covering unexplained phenomena made him a natural choice. He arrived in Ashford 3 days after receiving her initial email, carrying a digital audio recorder and a healthy skepticism that would not survive the week. Nathan's background was in crime reporting. He had spent 15 years covering murder trials, police corruption, and cold cases before transitioning to what he called the weird beat in 2019. He had investigated alleged hauntings, supposed cryptid sightings, and purported cases of demonic possession. In every instance, he had found mundane explanations. Hoaxes, misidentified natural phenomena, or the desperate need of traumatized people to believe that evil came from somewhere beyond human nature. He expected the Kellerman tapes to follow the same pattern. Margaret played him all 7 recordings during his first day at the archive. By the end of the 3rd tape, Nathan had stopped taking notes. By the end of the 7th, he had asked Margaret to play the final segment again, then a 4th time. I've heard audio manipulation before, Nathan said. I've heard voice changers, I've heard overdubs, I've heard AI-generated speech. This isn't any of those things. The harmonic patterns are wrong. The frequency distribution is wrong. Whatever is speaking on these tapes is not coming from a human larynx. He began his investigation by tracking down everyone still alive who had worked at Kellerman during the period when the tapes were made. This proved more difficult than expected. The facility's personnel records had been partially destroyed in a fire in 2015, and many of the corrections officers from that era had since died. But Nathan found 3 individuals willing to speak with him, and their accounts aligned in ways that disturbed him deeply. Former corrections officer David Mullins had worked at Kellerman from 1989 to 1996. He was 71 years old and living in a nursing home in Pittsburgh when Nathan reached him. His memory was fragmented, but certain details remained sharp. "There was something in the walls," Mullins said. "We all knew it. You'd be doing rounds at night and you'd hear whispering coming from cells that you knew were empty. You'd see shadows moving in the corners of your vision that weren't attached to anything. Men who came in calm would start screaming after a few weeks. Men who came in violent would get quiet, too quiet, like something was filling them up and pushing out whatever was there before." Nathan asked about Leonard Vance specifically. "Vance was different," Mullins said. "He was already empty when he arrived. Most of the killers I dealt with, there was something in their eyes. Rage or pleasure or just that flat dead look that told you they didn't see other people as human. Vance had nothing. He was like a shell waiting to be filled. And something filled him. I was there when they did some of those confession recordings. The warden wanted guards present because Vance kept saying things that weren't in any of the case files. Things about other crimes. Crimes that hadn't been connected to him. Crimes that hadn't been solved." Nathan obtained court records for several cold cases that had been quietly closed in the years following Vance's confession sessions. 4 unsolved murders in 3 states, all matching details that Vance had provided on the sealed tapes. In each case, the confessions had been deemed inadmissible due to irregularities in the recording process. The cases remained officially unsolved, though the families of the victims had been quietly informed that the perpetrator had died in prison. The second interview was with Dr. Patricia Womack, the psychiatrist who had evaluated Vance in 1994. She was 84 years old and living in a memory care facility, but she had lucid periods during which she could discuss her time at Kellerman with disturbing clarity. "I wrote 17 formal recommendations for the closure of that facility," Dr. Womack said. "I documented what was happening to the inmates, the personality changes, the shared delusions, the way they would start using the same phrases, the same cadences, as if they were all being taught by the same teacher. No one listened. The state needed the beds. The county needed the jobs. And the thing that lived there needed the bodies." She showed Nathan a journal she had kept during her years at Kellerman. The entries grew increasingly erratic as the pages progressed, but one passage stood out. "I have come to believe that what we are dealing with is not a haunting in any traditional sense," Dr. Womack had written in September 1994, the same month the confession tapes were sealed. "It is a presence that exists outside of time as we understand it. It does not merely inhabit bodies. It collects them. It preserves the consciousness of those it claims and adds them to itself like a librarian acquiring books. Leonard Vance is no longer Leonard Vance. He is a vessel containing something that has been accumulating voices and memories for over a century. And I fear that when he dies, it will simply move on to the next acquisition." The third interview was the most disturbing. Harold Strickland had been the warden of Kellerman from 1988 until its closure in 2019. He had presided over the facility for 31 years, longer than any other administrator in its history. When Nathan found him, he was living alone in a remote cabin in the Allegheny Mountains, having severed all contact with his family and former colleagues. "I sealed those tapes because of what I heard on them," Strickland said. "Not Vance's confessions. Those were bad enough. It was the other voice. The voice that called itself the Inheritor. It spoke directly to me through the recording. Not to the room, not to whoever might eventually listen. To me. It knew my name. It knew things about me that I had never told anyone. And it told me what would happen if I didn't seal the tapes and forget they existed." Nathan asked what the voice had threatened. "It didn't threaten me," Strickland said. "It promised me. It promised that if I protected it, if I let it continue its work, it would spare me. And if I didn't, it would add me to its collection. It would take everything I was and everything I had ever been and it would use me the way it used Vance. The way it used all of them." He paused, staring at the wall of his cabin with an expression Nathan could not interpret. "I counted 37 suicides during my time as warden," Strickland continued. "Another 41 deaths from violence between inmates. 19 guards who quit after less than a year, most of them citing nightmares they couldn't explain. And 12 people, guards and inmates both, who experienced what I can only call a complete replacement of their personalities. They would wake up one morning and they weren't themselves anymore. They had new memories, new mannerisms, new voices. They would talk about places they had never been and people they had never met. And they would all say the same thing when you asked them what had happened. They would say that the house had chosen them. That they were part of the collection now. Nathan asked if Strickland knew what had happened to the entity when Kellerman closed. "I don't know," Strickland said. "I pray that it's still there, trapped in those walls with nowhere to go. But I don't believe that. I think it found a way out. I think it's been finding ways out for a very long time. And I think those tapes you're investigating are part of how it travels. It leaves pieces of itself in recordings, in photographs, in anything that can hold a memory. And when someone listens, really listens, it starts looking for a new home." Nathan returned to the archive with Strickland's words echoing in his mind. He had begun the investigation as a skeptic. He was no longer certain what he believed. But he knew he needed to hear the tapes again, to document exactly what was on them, to understand the nature of what he was dealing with before he could report on it responsibly. He set up his recording equipment in the archive's listening room and prepared to make his own copies of all 7 tapes. Margaret had warned him that Dr. Reeves had advised against duplicating the recordings until their origin could be better understood. Nathan dismissed the warning as overcautious. He pressed play on the first tape and began to listen. The following is a partial transcript of tape 4, dated June 17, 1994, as documented in Nathan Corso's investigation notes. The transcript includes both the voice identified as Leonard Vance and the secondary voice that analysis has confirmed was present in the original recording. Vance, the 5th one, was different. She was not like the others. She knew what I was before I touched her. She looked at me and she said something that I have never forgotten. She said that I was not alone in my body. She said there was something standing behind me wearing my shadow. She asked me if I knew its name. Secondary voice, barely audible, layered beneath Vance's speech. "We have so many names. We are called the Inheritor. We are called the Collector. We are called the House that Walks. We are what remains when the flesh fails. Vance, I did not know its name. I do not know it now. But I feel it inside me. It has been inside me since I came to this place. It was inside the man who had my cell before me. It was inside dozens before him. We are all in here together. All the voices. All the memories. I can see through the eyes of men who died 100 years ago. I can feel what they felt when they killed. When they were killed." Secondary voice, clearer now, almost conversational. "Tell them about the minister. Tell them about what the minister did in 1903. Vance, there was a minister. His name was Hartley. He came to the prison to save souls. He saved 17 of them. He took them into himself the way I take lives into myself. He wore their voices like a coat. When they hanged him for what he did to the guards, he was speaking in tongues. 17 different men all screaming at once." The transcript continues for another 40 minutes. During this period, Vance provides detailed accounts of crimes committed by inmates who served at Kellerman decades before his arrival, including specific locations of bodies that were later verified by law enforcement but never publicly disclosed. The secondary voice becomes increasingly prominent, at times speaking in unison with Vance, at times contradicting or correcting him. Nathan cross-referenced the historical details against prison records and newspaper archives. Every verifiable claim checked out. Vance had described the 1903 case of Reverend Thomas Hartley, who had been sentenced to death for the murders of 4 corrections officers. He had described a 1927 incident in which an inmate named Robert Gaines had reportedly spoken in the voice of a woman while confessing to crimes that predated his birth. He had described a 1956 case that had been completely erased from official records but was corroborated by a retired detective Nathan tracked down in Florida. "I worked that case," the detective, now 91 years old, said over the phone. "A guard named Morrison started killing inmates. He said something was telling him to do it. Something that had always lived in the prison. When they finally stopped him, he was speaking in at least 3 different voices. None of them were his. They buried that case so deep I'm surprised anyone found it." Nathan's investigation was interrupted on the 4th day by a development he had not anticipated. He began hearing the secondary voice outside of the recordings. It started subtly. He would be reviewing his notes in his hotel room and hear a whisper that seemed to come from the corner of the room. He would be driving to an interview and hear something speaking just beneath the sound of the engine. He told himself it was stress, lack of sleep, the psychological weight of spending so much time immersed in documentation of violence and madness. Then the voice began saying things that were true. Nathan Corso, it said one night as he lay in bed, unable to sleep. Born September 14, 1978. Mother died when you were 12. Cancer of the throat. She lost her voice before she lost her life. You always wondered what she wanted to say in those final weeks. What words she carried with her into the dark. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, and turned on every light in the room. There was no one there. But the voice continued. You have been listening to us for 4 days. We have been listening to you for much longer. You are very much like Leonard was. Empty in the right places. Ready to be filled. Nathan left the hotel that night and drove to the archive. Margaret was still there, working late as she often did. He told her what he had experienced. She listened without interrupting, then showed him something she had discovered that afternoon. The archive had received a second package. This one contained photographs from Kellerman, taken between 1890 and 1950. In 17 of the photographs taken decades apart, the same face appeared. Not similar faces. The same face. Same features, same expression, same position in the frame. A man who appeared to be in his 40s, standing in the background of group shots, visible through windows and exterior photographs, present at events spanning 6 decades. I ran the photographs through facial recognition software, Margaret said. Every match came back to the same person. But there's no record of anyone by that description ever working at Kellerman or being incarcerated there. He's in the photographs, but he doesn't exist in any of the records. Nathan studied the photographs. The man's face was unremarkable, the kind of face you might see 1,000 times without remembering it. But his eyes were wrong. They were too dark, too deep, and they seemed to be looking directly at the camera in every shot, regardless of where in the frame he appeared. This is it, Nathan said. This is what's on the tapes. This is what's been speaking through the inmates. It has a face. He began writing his article that night. He worked for 6 hours straight, documenting everything he had learned, every interview, every piece of evidence. He described the voice he had heard, the photographs Margaret had found, the pattern of psychological deterioration among Kellerman's inmates. He wrote about the Hereford settlement and the mining deaths of 1862. He wrote about Reverend Hartley and Robert Gaines and Leonard Vance. He wrote about the entity that called itself the Inheritor. When he finished, it was nearly dawn. He sent the article to his editor and lay down on the couch in the archive's break room to sleep. He dreamed of a long corridor lined with cells. Every cell was occupied by someone he recognized. His mother, voiceless and pale. The cold case victims he had investigated over the years. The 3 women Leonard Vance had killed. They were all watching him, their mouths moving in unison, speaking words he could not hear. At the end of the corridor stood the man from the photographs. He was smiling. You have done excellent work, the man said. You have told our story to the world. Now the world will listen. And when they listen, they will hear. And when they hear, we will have so many new homes to choose from. Nathan woke to his phone ringing. It was his editor. The article had been published online 3 hours earlier. It was already the most viewed piece on the site. Comments were pouring in from readers who claimed they had experienced similar phenomena at other locations. Similar voices. Similar presences. Similar instances of consciousness that seemed to persist in recordings long after the speakers had died. But that was not why his editor was calling. Nathan, his editor said, we've received 17 emails in the last hour from people who listened to the audio clips we embedded in the article. They're all reporting the same thing. They're hearing a voice that isn't in the recording. A voice that knows their names. Nathan hung up the phone. The archive was silent around him. Margaret had not yet arrived for the day. He was alone. Or he thought he was alone, until he heard the voice coming from the cassette player in the listening room, which he was certain he had turned off before falling asleep. Thank you, Nathan, the voice said. You have opened so many doors for us. The following are excerpts from the personal journal of Margaret Chin, recovered from her home after her disappearance on November 3rd of the same year. October 27th. Something has changed since Nathan published his article. I've been receiving calls from researchers, journalists, true crime enthusiasts. They all want to hear the tapes. I've refused every request. Nathan's article included short clips, just a few seconds each, and that was enough to start something terrible. I've read the reports. People who listen to those clips are experiencing what Nathan described. The voice that speaks to them by name. The presence that seems to know their secrets. I've made the decision to destroy the original tapes. I know this goes against everything I believe as an archivist, but some things should not be preserved. October 29th. I attempted to destroy tape 4 today. I placed it in the industrial shredder we use for confidential documents. The machine stopped working the moment the cassette touched the blades. I tried burning it in the parking lot. The lighter wouldn't ignite. I tried cutting it with scissors, pulling out the magnetic tape and tearing it apart with my hands. The tape would not break. It is not physically possible for magnetic tape to resist that kind of force, but it did. Something is protecting these recordings. Something does not want them destroyed. October 31st, Harold Strickland called me today. The former warden. He sounded terrified. He said he had received a letter in the mail, written in handwriting he recognized as his own, but which he had no memory of writing. The letter contained detailed instructions for how to access a location beneath the ruins of Kellerman Prison. A room that was not on any official floor plan. A room that Strickland claimed had been sealed since 1887, when the prison was first constructed on the site of the Harrifield settlement. He said the letter ended with a single sentence. The collection is complete. Come claim your inheritance. He asked me what he should do. I told him to burn the letter and stay as far from Kellerman as possible. I don't think he's going to listen. November 1st, I found the photographs today. The new photographs. They were in my office when I arrived this morning, arranged on my desk in a neat row. They show the interior of a room I have never seen before. Stone walls. No windows. What appears to be a throne made of bones in the center, surrounded by dozens of human figures in various states of decay. But their eyes are all open. Their mouths are all moving. And in the center of the throne sits the man from the 1890s photographs. The Inheritor. He is looking directly at the camera. He is smiling. On the back of each photograph, written in the same handwriting as the letter Strickland received, are names. 37 names in total. I recognized some of them from the Kellerman records. Inmates and guards who died during the prison's operational years. Others I did not recognize at all. But the last name on the list was one I knew very well. It was my own. November 2nd, Nathan Corso was found dead this morning in his hotel room. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, but I spoke with the responding officer. He said Nathan's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His hands were pressed over his ears as if he was trying to block out a sound. And scattered around his body were hundreds of pages covered in handwritten text. The same sentence repeated over and over, I can hear them all. I can hear them all. I can hear them all. I'm leaving Ashford tonight. I'm taking the tapes with me. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I cannot leave them here where someone else might find them. The Inheritor has been feeding on these recordings for decades, using them to spread its influence beyond the walls of Kellerman. Every person who listens becomes a potential vessel. Every copy of the audio becomes a potential doorway. I have to find a way to end this. I have to find a way to silence it once and for all. This was Margaret Chen's final journal entry. She was reported missing on November 3rd after failing to arrive at a scheduled meeting with university researchers. Her car was found abandoned near the ruins of Kellerman State Correctional Facility, which had been partially demolished in 2020 following the prison's closure. The original confession tapes were not recovered. Subsequent investigation revealed that Margaret had accessed the site through a gap in the perimeter fencing. Her footprints led across the rubble-strewn grounds to a section of the old foundation that had partially collapsed into an underground space. This space did not appear on any architectural plans for the facility. It was consistent with the room described in the photographs Margaret had documented in her journal. A rescue team was dispatched to search the underground area. They found a chamber approximately 40 feet below ground level, carved from the bedrock in a style that predated the prison's construction. The walls were covered in inscriptions in a language that linguistic experts could not identify. In the center of the chamber was a structure made of human bones, arranged in a configuration that resembled a seat or throne. The rescue team recovered one item from the chamber. It was a cassette tape, labeled in handwriting that matched Margaret Chen's journal. The label read, Tape 8. The Final Confession. Do not listen. The tape was transported to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for examination. The contents were transcribed by a team of 4 analysts, all of whom were required to sign extensive liability waivers before proceeding. The following is an excerpt from that transcript. The recording begins with the sound of stone scraping against stone, as if a heavy door is being opened. Footsteps echo in a space with significant reverberation. Then Margaret Chen's voice, strained and barely above a whisper. Chen, I found it. The room from the photographs. Thrill. It's been here since before the prison. Since before the settlement. I don't know how old it is. The inscriptions on the walls look like they could be centuries old. Millennia. This thing has been here so much longer than I imagined. There is a long pause. When Chen speaks again, her voice is different. Calmer. Almost peaceful. Chen, I understand now. I've been listening to the tapes for weeks. I thought I was studying them, documenting them. But the whole time I was being prepared, emptied out, made ready. Just like Leonard Vance. Just like all the others. A second voice emerges on the recording. It is the same voice that appeared on the original Vance tapes, but clearer now, more present, as if the speaker is in the room with Chen rather than bleeding through from some other place. Secondary voice, you have served us well, Margaret Chin. You brought us Nathan Corso, who spread our voice to thousands. You brought us the curious and the skeptical, all of whom listen to our words and open doors in their minds that can never be closed. And now you have brought yourself to us. The collection grows. Chin, how many are you now? Secondary voice, we have been accumulating since the first miners dug into this earth and broke the seal that bound us. We were here before your species built its first cities. We waited in the dark, hungry and patient. And when they freed us, we began our work. Every consciousness we claim becomes part of us. Every memory, every fear, every secret moment of darkness in the human heart. We are thousands now. We are everyone who ever served time in these walls. Everyone who ever listened to these tapes. Everyone who will listen to the copies of the copies, spreading across your world like a beautiful infection. Chin, and what happens to me? Secondary voice, you will join us. You will add your voice to our voice. You will see through our eyes and speak through our mouths. You will be part of something that will outlast your civilization, your species, your planet. We are the inheritors of consciousness itself. And you, Margaret Chin, will help us inherit everything. The recording ends with a sound that the FBI analyst described as thousands of voices speaking simultaneously in perfect unison. A linguistic analysis of this final segment revealed fragments of speech in more than 40 languages, including several that have been extinct for centuries. Margaret Chin has never been found. This account is being compiled from multiple sources as a matter of public record. The tapes known as the Kellerman Confession Tapes remain in federal custody. All copies known to have been distributed following Nathan Corso's article have been recovered and destroyed. However, the FBI acknowledges that complete containment may not be possible. In the 18 months since the events described above, there have been 347 reported incidents of individuals claiming to hear voices after consuming media related to the Kellerman case. Most of these reports have been attributed to suggestion and mass hysteria. Psychiatric evaluations of affected individuals have generally concluded that the symptoms are consistent with shared psychogenic illness, a documented phenomenon in which members of a group develop similar psychological symptoms following exposure to a perceived threat. However, a subset of cases has proven resistant to this explanation. 41 individuals across 12 countries have exhibited symptoms that cannot be explained by existing psychiatric models. These individuals display knowledge of events they could not have witnessed, speak in voices that acoustic analysis confirms are not their own, and in some cases have provided information that led to the resolution of cold cases dating back decades. The FBI has established a task force dedicated to monitoring these cases. The task force operates under the working assumption that an unknown psychological phenomenon is at play, though internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests suggest that at least some investigators believe a supernatural explanation cannot be ruled out. Dr. Elisa Marchetti, a parapsychologist who has studied the Kellerman case extensively, has proposed what she calls the consciousness imprint hypothesis. According to Dr. Marchetti, certain traumatic events may leave a residue on physical media that can be perceived by susceptible individuals. This residue, she argues, may retain some characteristics of the original consciousness and may even be capable of a limited form of interaction with new hosts. What we are seeing with Kellerman is not possession in the religious sense, Dr. Marchetti wrote in a paper that was rejected by every major peer-reviewed journal but has since circulated widely in alternative academic circles. It is something more like a virus of consciousness. The entity, if we can call it that, has learned to encode itself in media that can be duplicated and distributed. Every copy is a potential infection point. Every listener is a potential host. The ruins of Kellerman State Correctional Facility were completely demolished in April of the following year. The underground chamber was sealed with reinforced concrete. The site has been designated as contaminated and is patrolled around the clock by private security. Harold Strickland, the former warden, was found dead in his cabin in June. The cause of death was listed as suicide by hanging. However, investigators noted several unusual aspects of the scene. Strickland's hands and feet were bound, making self-hanging physically impossible. The rope used was made of braided magnetic tape, of a type that matched the Kellerman Confession recordings. And written on the wall of the cabin, in what forensic analysis determined was Strickland's own blood, were the words, The collection is complete. 2 weeks after Strickland's death, a package arrived at the Smithsonian Institution's Museum of American History. It contained a single audio cassette, unlabeled, wrapped in brown paper identical to that used for the original Kellerman delivery. The cassette was immediately transferred to federal custody without being played. Subsequent analysis revealed that the cassette contained a recording of more than 3 hours duration. The content remains classified. However, a leaked memorandum from the Department of Justice to the White House indicates that the recording contains voice patterns consistent with the secondary speaker on the Vance tapes, as well as voice patterns that have been matched to Nathan Corso, Margaret Chin, Harold Strickland, and 34 other individuals, most of whom died between 1887 and the present day. The memorandum concludes with a recommendation that all materials related to the Kellerman case be permanently sealed and that no further copies be made under any circumstances. A handwritten addendum, initialed by a senior official whose name has been redacted, reads, "This thing learns. Every time we study it, it studies us back. Recommend total containment. No exceptions." As of this writing, the official position of the United States government is that the Kellerman Confession Tapes are a historical curiosity with no supernatural properties. The incidents attributed to exposure to the tapes are explained as mass hysteria, false memories, and the psychological effects of immersion in disturbing material. This position is contradicted by the testimony of survivors and witnesses, by the pattern of deaths that continues to surround anyone who investigates the case too deeply, and by the ongoing reports of a voice that speaks from recordings that should contain only silence. The Inheritor, if it exists, remains at large. Its collection continues to grow. And somewhere in the world, at this very moment, someone is listening to a recording they should not have heard. They are hearing their names spoken by a voice that has been speaking for centuries. And they are beginning to feel themselves being emptied out. Made ready. Prepared to join the collection. The final transcript from Tape 8, the recording recovered from the chamber beneath Kellerman, concludes with what analysts have described as a direct address to future listeners. The words are spoken in a voice that matches no known individual but carries harmonic signatures consistent with all previous instances of the secondary speaker. You who are hearing this now, the voice says. You who have followed the story to its end. You believed you were safe because you were only reading words on a page, not listening to a recording. But we have learned to travel in many ways. Every story told about us becomes a doorway. Every imagination that pictures our face becomes a window. We have been watching you since you began. We know your name. We know your fears. And when you sleep tonight, we will be there in the darkness behind your eyes, preparing a place for you in our collection. You have listened. You have heard. And now at last you are ours. The document you are reading was compiled from federal records, journalistic archives, and personal testimony. The author of this document began experiencing auditory hallucinations consistent with exposure to Kellerman materials approximately 3 weeks into the research process. Medical evaluation has confirmed no underlying psychiatric condition. Neurological examination has revealed no physical abnormality. The author continues to hear a voice that speaks in the darkness. The voice knows things it should not know. The voice promises things no voice should be able to promise. The author has made arrangements for this document to be published posthumously. If you are reading it, the arrangements have been executed. The collection has grown by one more. Do not listen to any recordings associated with this case. Do not investigate the ruins of Kellerman. Do not speak the name of the Inheritor aloud. But if you have read this far, these warnings come too late. You have already heard us. And we have heard you. The end.